Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. I had a message yesterday from someone called Dennis asking if I could do a podcast about our tea culture. So that's our topic of today, tea culture in the UK. Well, first of all, I have to say that we did have a very strong tea culture here, which lasted at least 200 or 300 years, drinking tea. But over the years, that's largely now been replaced with coffee. I think it's all to do with the way we work, because in the workplace, especially if you're in an office, you don't hear people saying, "Would you like a cup of tea?" You hear people saying, "Would you like a cup of coffee?" So tea drinking has disappeared. Tea drinking was particularly common in the 19th century and up until the 1950s and 60s. In those days, we didn't really have coffee, and people were very suspicious of it. Basically, when coffee came, many people were very against it. I remember my grandparents were members of the Anti-Coffee League, which existed in this area. For some reason, in their minds, coffee was a terrible drug which was going to affect our young people. They were fine with whiskey and alcohol, but they, for some reason, had a big issue with coffee. We can still see traces of that today. Many churches in the English-speaking world don't actually allow coffee drinkers. You have to sign a declaration saying that you will avoid coffee. I think the Mormons, that's one group that don't drink coffee. The Adventists, Christian Scientists, those churches, none of them drink coffee. They were always very suspicious of it, and they viewed it as a drug. Anyway, back to our tea drinking. So here, nobody really drinks tea, but everyone has tea at home. Because at home, if someone comes to visit, you're going to ask, "Would you like a cup of tea?" It's very unlikely you're going to offer them a coffee. Tea is the way of greeting guests. In offices, as I mentioned, it's very different, but at home, everyone has tea. But the days of teapots have all gone. Now people use cups or mugs and they simply put a tea bag inside it, rattle it around in the water for a few minutes, and then put it in the bin. And you're left with a cup of brown water which doesn't look very nice. In the old days, making tea was a ritual. In fact, we had tea rooms instead of coffee shops, which we have today. And tea rooms were known for their types of tea. To make a good pot of tea, you really need to begin by filling the teapot with hot water. Then you go away and leave it sitting for a few minutes, and you come back and you pour the hot water out. Next, you put tea in the bottom of the teapot, and then you put more hot water inside. You stir the teapot, you leave it sitting again, and then after a few minutes, you can pour out the first bit of tea. And it's usually white. The first pouring of the tea is a bit too white to serve. So you pour that into the sink, and you're left with tea which is ready to be served. You give everyone a cup and a saucer, and then you pour the tea and you offer milk and sugar with it. That was the way it used to be done. Whereas now you offer someone a cup of tea, it's a tea bag and a cup, and you just bring it with milk in it if that's what they've asked for. So there isn't really a ritual to it anymore. I like loose tea. Loose tea was what we had before they invented tea bags. You had to take a spoonful of tea from the box and put it in the teapot, and you could make the tea as strong or as weak as you want. So it was very different from using tea bags, which we have these days. People now don't really have time or desire. In fact, most people I know wouldn't even own a teapot. I do. I keep it for guests. And some people even have teapots that they cover with little knitted designs or patterns to keep the teapot warm. As a teacher, some people ask me, is it true that English people drink tea at 5 p.m.? This is a stereotype or an urban myth which seems to have come from the Alice in Wonderland books. I can honestly say I don't know anyone who really drinks tea, and I really don't know anyone who drinks tea at 5 o'clock. I don't think we ever did that. I think that was just an urban myth. So, if people are going to drink tea or coffee, usually around 11 a.m. in the morning, they would have it. Although these days it's common to see people with coffee flasks or a cup of Starbucks coffee on the train or rushing for the train. I think it's just part of modern living, and it's something which has been perpetuated by movies and American TV shows. It seems a little bit strange for me that we've lost this tradition of tea drinking, especially since when I think of my grandparents and their anti-coffee league, they were obviously fighting to protect the drinking of tea in our society. Our neighbouring country, Ireland, drinks more tea than the UK does. It's their national drink and they love it. Every morning, every evening, there's tea with every meal. It's a ritual that hasn't been broken yet. I mean, they do have their coffee as well, I'm sure of that. But tea is for welcoming guests. And that's the same for us. A guest is coming over. You don't say, would you like coffee? You would say, would you like tea? I think it was all about the sharing. Pouring tea from one source into different cups was almost like a form of magic. It's like when you eat together. I don't know exactly why sharing in this way was so important. I'm guessing it goes all the way back to our religious times, when eating meals together was something very special. In fact, it was almost the glue which held families together. It wasn't just used for drinking tea, there was also an entertainment attached to it. I remember my grandmother, for example, she had this idea that you could tell people's future from reading the tea leaves. Of course, she couldn't do that now because we have tea bags, so there's no tea leaves in the bottom of the cup. But basically, she would let you drink your tea, and then she would turn the cup upside down once you drank it, and she would turn the cup 2 or 3 times and then look inside it to see what shapes the tea had left in the cup. She would then try to tell us some future events. I never really thought of this as being supernatural, although these days people would find it weird, I suppose. But for some reason, it seemed quite normal when she did it at the time. Nobody really thought about it. Maybe it's because they just thought she was crazy, or maybe it was just something older people did. But I can remember her doing that with me. It seemed to be kind of a normal thing, part of her practice. So this was another thing about tea drinking. People used to love having their tea leaves read. All of that has been completely washed away now. Tea is something that we offer guests, but I'm not really sure it's something that we drink ourselves. So to answer the question for Dennis, we don't really have a tea culture now. There are traces of our tea culture with our sense of welcoming the guests, but there isn't really much else left of our tea drinking culture. People have moved on to coffee, and even when you go to the supermarket, there isn't such a variety anymore of tea. And to buy loose tea takes a bit of an effort because you can't really find that anywhere. Loose tea, of course, is the one that you can spoon out from the box. I have to say, I don't really consider tea drinking so important now. If there's guests, then I'll almost certainly get my teapot and do the ritual with the warm water. But generally speaking, it's much easier simply to choose an instant drink like hot chocolate or decaffeinated coffee or something like this. Yeah, and of course, when we offer people a cup of tea, we say, "Would you like a cup of tea?" And many people are confused as to why we're so polite about it. Well, would you like, of course, comes from one of our conditionals. The whole sentence would be, would you like a cup of tea if I asked you what you wanted? And the full answer would be, if you asked me what I wanted, yes, I would like a cup of tea. So we just shorten it. We say, would you like a cup of tea? And the last part, if I asked you if you wanted one, what would you say? So you see, it's just a very ultra polite way of speaking, especially to people that you don't know so well. But tea was cheap, so there was always tea. There was always tea sitting on the stove, waiting to be served. It was a very beautiful ritual. But for the future, I think probably in countries like Iran or Turkey, tea is still considered to be a wonderful thing, but I'm not sure that's the same kind of tea that we drink. I think that's more just a local thing. For us, tea was a huge thing, and the ritual of tea, I'm sure, will survive around the world. But in the UK, I don't know, people just don't seem to care much about these days, about tea drinking. I mean, for me personally, I'm up early. I like to make bread in the morning with my hands. So I like traditional things, but I'm well aware that unfortunately, I'm kind of in a minority with that. Well, that's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed this little story about tea and tea drinking. Go and get yourself a nice cup of tea if you have one. Let's try to bring back that tradition. See you. Bye.